Lesson 10, Jamestown Settlement. If at first you don't succeed, try again. That is a saying by Thomas H. Palmer. Determination, the art of never giving up. Have you ever been determined to do something? Perhaps you were determined to learn a new skill, overcome a fear, or accomplish a task so you could enjoy something exciting afterwards. That spark you felt is the same spark that has been felt in the hearts of men and women throughout history. It's a gift that God gave mankind so that he could accomplish great things and fulfill his purposes for us. It is that internal motivation that keeps us going even when the task might seem overwhelming. Mankind is made in God's image. This means that we have many of his characteristics, including determination. When we set our minds to something, we can accomplish it. We have seen determination throughout history. Here are a few examples. Have you ever read the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis? Joseph was hated and sold by his brothers into slavery, lied about, convicted of a crime he didn't commit, and thrown in prison. But through all that, he was determined to love others, forgive quickly, and serve God. Through his determination and faithfulness, God used Joseph to save all of Egypt and his family from Canaan. Determination is what inspired Christopher Columbus to sail back across the Atlantic over and over again. He believed in his cause and was able to convince people with wealth and power to back him. Even though some of his calculations were not correct and his methods were questionable, he was a compelling leader in the race of exploration. The Apostle Paul was determined to destroy Christianity, but then he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. Paul considered himself the chief of all sinners, and yet he was determined to serve his Redeemer and spread the gospel. He was unwavering despite being thrown in prison more than once, shipwrecked and beaten. Many famous authors such as C.S. Lewis, Dr. Seuss, and Judy Blume experienced rejection as they pursued their goals of writing, but they never gave up. These authors have written books that are beloved by many today. The first successful British colony. The British were also determined to establish colonies in the New World. After failure of the last colony of Roanoke, they could have given up, but they knew their persistence would lead them to success. And so, in December of 1606, 3 ships carrying about 100 colonists and led by Captain Christopher Newport left England on a voyage to start a new colony in Virginia. This voyage was overseen by the Virginia Company and received its blessings and funding from King James I. Things you should know are during this time, the entire east coast of North America was called Virginia. It was named after Queen Elizabeth I, who was known as the Virgin Queen because she refused to get married. After about a month of searching for the perfect settlement, they made landfall on a small peninsula on the James River in May of 1607. This location was chosen because it met the criteria outlined by the Virginia Company for a good settlement site. The spot they chose was surrounded on 3 sides by deep water located inland away from the open ocean and not inhabited by indigenous Americans. Perhaps after the failures and difficulties of past attempts, the British were looking for a place that they could call their own. Perhaps they thought that if they found somewhere away from the indigenous Americans, they would be able to have better relations with them. However, like most of the early settlers, the British failed to understand that land did not work the same way in the New World. The indigenous people did not own land the same way the Europeans did. They migrated, they hunted, and they often moved with the weather and seasonal changes. Contact with the Powhatan tribe who hunted in the region was inevitable. Establishing a colony. Out of the group of 100 colonists, about half were artisans, which are skilled workers who make things with their hands, soldiers, and workers. The rest of the settlers were wealthy men with no particular trade or skill. They all worked together to build their small town. The work was challenging, but they quickly constructed a triangular fort which protected their weapons and supplies. In addition, they built a church and several houses. In June, Captain Newport set sail with 2 of the ships and returned to England for supplies. He brought with him a report of how things were going, but it wasn't quite accurate. You see, the settlers had not put in work required to maintain a healthy life. They still needed a stockpile of food for winter and secure a fresh water source. Something to think about is, notice that we said the settlers were men. We mean all men. The first settlers sent to establish Jamestown were all male. Women would not arrive for another 9 months to marry, begin families, and help run the settlement. Shortly after the ships left, the colony began to fall ill. A variety of diseases fell through the settlement. Part of the problem was that they were drinking unclean water from the salty, swampy waters surrounding the settlement. In addition, they were exposed to new diseases and had a shortage of food. The number of deaths was quite high, and if not for the help of the Powhatan people, the colony might or would have failed. Think about it. As we're going to discover, the relationship between the Powhatan people and the British settlers was not always good or peaceful. However, through the lens of history, we can begin to see the full picture. Each side was trying to understand the other, trying to do what they thought was right, and trying to protect their people from something that was unknown. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone on the outside might not understand the full picture? How does it feel? Why do you think it is important to not assign blame or define your opinion until you understand both sides of the situation? Powhatan. When the British settlers arrived, Chief Powhatan was the leader of over 30 local tribes. While each tribe had its own chief and way of life, they all reported to Powhatan. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. This meant they fought alongside him and supported his decisions. As a group, these 30 individual tribes are referred to as the Powhatan, maybe? I'm not sure. Maybe it's Powhatan tribe. Initially, the relationship between the Powhatan and the British were peaceful. During the difficult early days of the settlement, the Powhatan brought food from their harvest to feed the settlers. However, tensions began to rise between the groups. At times, there was open trade and peaceful communication, and then things would become violent. This cycle continued for quite some time. Distractions. During the early days of settlement, the colonists spent much of their time searching for gold. This was because the Virginia Company had promised to repay King James I with treasures found in the New World. Unfortunately, this pursuit did not help the settlers with basic survival. In fact, it distracted them from the truly important task of finding, growing, and storing food. Many new settlers arrived in 1608, which meant there were more hands to help with the search for gold and food. However, one of the new colonists accidentally started a fire which destroyed all of the homes the settlers had built. This destruction set them back even further with a search for food and made them more dependent on the Powhatan for trade. In addition, the construction of larger government buildings also distracted the colonists. It seemed their priorities were on the wrong tasks. They were determined to find gold and build a strong colony, but they were forgetting that in order to do that, they needed to provide for their basic needs like food and water. No work, no food. John Smith. John Smith, who was a member of the Jamestown Council, objected to the distraction of gold digging and suggested that more time be spent on tasks that were important to survival. Eventually, Smith became the president of the colony and began imposing new rules. One such rule stated that unless you were sick, you had to work, and if you didn't work, you wouldn't eat. This rule might seem harsh, but during the times that Smith was president, no one died of starvation, and they managed to survive the winter of 1608. Smith also worked on establishing peace between the British and the Powhatan tribe. This peace allowed much-needed trade to continue. While it seemed things were looking up for the colony, everything was about to change. A new fleet of ships was on its way and brought with them new leadership. It was decided that Jamestown would now be led by a governor, and John Smith was asked to step down. Before his term ended, he was injured in an accident and was forced to return to England in 1609. It was at this time that Jamestown entered its most difficult season. The end of chapter 9. Not chapter 9, chapter 10.